Good day and welcome, America and beyond. I'm Tom Donahue for Tom Donahue Reports, Patriotism in Action, putting America first, New World Order dead last. The election is said and done, although it's really not completely said. It might be done. And we are going to talk about what the next 4 years portend, and also the remnants and reminiscing about Romney. Now, just to refresh your memory, I did make a prediction, and I don't know if it was all that bold, but back in 2009 I said Romney would be the nominee and the next president of the United States, but I rescinded, or better worded, I revised that prognostication or forecasting. And so my prediction after Clinton, the closer at the Democrat National Convention, even in spite of Romney's surge and his stellar debate performance after the first debate, I said that Obama would be reelected. And then I made sure that I put this in podcast form and streamed it the night before and the day of the election, so that I was on the record. Now, a lot of politicians don't like to be on the record, but I like being on the record. And I like being able to say, okay, I'm going to live or die by my own words, and I possibly could have eaten some crow, and I may have been way off the mark, but it's okay to revise predictions and reports if you feel that either the facts or if you feel that the data that's been collected would alter, and I think you should always base things on the facts and the figures. And that's what I did, based on my intelligence gathering, based on I'd have to say my incisive analysis. And so when I listen to so many of the Republicans, whether they be the moguls, the mavens, or the minions, whether it be the stars of Fox Follies, or it was, blowhards like Rush Limbaugh, and many of his counterparts, when they made these ridiculous predictions. And I guess you say, well, they're just a little too close for comfort as it relates to how cozy these embedded relationships are with these broadcasters and these media folks with the politicians, and how intertwined they are with their party and how beholden they are. There was something that I said in the last broadcast, and I don't know if I ever got around to saying it correctly. And I guess you could say that because of the separation between these movements and how little effect they had on the general election, and that was the Occupy movement, Occupy Wall Street. I said something about Wall Street, but I don't know if I said the word Occupy, because we really don't talk about that. Now, based on what I understand, they were more adamantly opposed to Romney, but they also started to catch on to the fact that, well, a lot of that same funding and super PACs and being in lockstep with, to some degree, even though you propose legislation or attempt to pass legislation, reining in, allegedly, the Wall Street gangsters and banksters. But yeah, they essentially had little or no effect, and the Tea Party had maybe slightly more effect, but not much. They were non-factors, and because of I guess you could say Gary Johnson had some name recognition and some credibility. When he didn't gain traction in the Republican Party, you kind of sensed that he wasn't going to gain enough traction as a third-party candidate, although I'm glad they had someone of his stature, as a former governor, and someone that had at least some name recognition and a record, and and was a legitimate libertarian candidate. So unlike Bob Barr. Now, let me move beyond those factors, which really weren't all that great a factor. But I did recommend, and I did exhort and try to influence you to vote third party or go independent and vote your conscience and stand by your principles and do the right thing. Not lesser of evils, because just think, all those people, let's just say 48%, I think it might be down as low as, I think it's 47% now, of the popular vote voted for Romney. Was that a wasted vote because he didn't win? You didn't get your way? I would say no, even though I wouldn't vote for Romney. I certainly wouldn't vote for Barack Obama. But nevertheless, that argument, if many people already felt like McCain was not going to win. He didn't have much of a chance in those closing days. But many on the Republican side absolutely felt like Romney had a good chance and actually believed to the very end that he was going to pull it out, that there were going to be some magical precincts or districts or campaign coffers or some kind of treasure trove or treasure chest, of votes, and it just didn't materialize. And again, I want to criticize, even more so than I did the last broadcast, the fact that you've got these pundits and you've got these, these Fox Follies analysts and special guest contributors, and all they did was contribute a lot of hogwash. All the focus groups and all the statistical data that they're supposed to be privy to, and it turned out that the establishment polls were actually more accurate. Now they probably a week to 10 days prior, they did have Romney in some battleground states, in some swing states, that he was a little ahead or even or close to Obama. So the race did tighten for a while. But again, I thought there could be some seething, and I thought there could be some discontent and resentment that Obama didn't do more and didn't accomplish all the hope and change that they had wished for. But when they looked at the alternative, which really wasn't much of an alternative, they realized they didn't want this rich guy. They didn't want Mr. Robot. They didn't want a guy that they said, well, wait a minute. He said this 10 years ago and said this last year and said this last month. And all the wiggles and the wavering and the reversals and the flip-flops, and he just wasn't a likable guy. He just didn't resonate with, America at large. And even the so-called base, the Republican base, still had their doubts. And still felt like, oh boy, this is Bob Dole all over again, or some of the other losers, literally and figuratively, the McCains, the moderates, the centrist. But when Romney said he was, I almost kind of thought that even though I believe that the globalists, the world order, had decided upon that had selected, then later rejected Romney. I said when he said he was a severe conservative at CPAC, nobody believed that. I mean, why would he say that? I mean, he must think that his level of aloofness and arrogance, and Obama's got those same traits, but Obama still, He knew how to talk the language. He knew how to say certain things that people felt he was still, not too separated from the middle class. Okay, but nevertheless, the boots on the ground, whether it was the unions or it was just a lot, women's groups. the feminists, etc. He just had a lot of groups that they said, we're not going to allow for the Republicans to take us down a certain road. And then when you had these Republicans defending these guys that, I don't know where they came up with these concepts of rape and fighting in such a prominent way against women's issues and what they perceived to be their reproductive rights, and it just seemed like they got off track. Now, I just have to say that I'm a little bit taken aback by the fact that people in alternative radio, more or less, made these pronouncements. I mean, I guess you could say predictions that Romney, was already, he was the hand-picked, puppet, that he was guaranteed, and that Obama was going to be replaced. Well, I said similar things until I actually studied this. And I had to make the change, and I wasn't reversing myself, because I really felt that just because Romney had won great debate, and just because the economic conditions had not improved sufficiently enough, and then, any other candidate that would have had credibility, believability, likability, and that would not have been considered so aloof and just someone that was so distant, and you just couldn't feel a connection with, I think almost any other Republican could have beaten Obama. And there's no reason that a Republican should not have beaten Obama. But so many missteps and miscues in this election cycle. A lot of money spent, a ton of money, and you would think that that money, and on both sides, with these super PACs, with these impersonal entities, these faceless, nameless entities that control, that can literally control the destiny of our political future. Now, another thing I wanted to touch on was these programs, or these new featured programs I'm doing called The Interview. And I have more invites out, and I will continue to record those. And I'm glad that now we have finer fidelity, and I've worked out those record issues. And again, it's only 2 interviews. First one, my sound didn't come through as well because, as I mentioned, I had to use the external mic on my laptop. And then the second one came out pretty well, with the Libertarian VP candidate. So I'm looking forward to more tapings and more featured interviews, which I call that feature The Interview, or The Interview. But some of them will be conversational, but many of them will be confrontational, or maybe a mixture of the two, depending on the guest, the theme, the purpose, the mission. But if you have suggestions, by all means, make sure you contact me through my email. Would be the best way. And all the contact information, all my links and ways to communicate or to avail yourself of the offerings of this program, and yours truly, is at TomDonahueReports.com. TomDonahueReports.com. Now back to Obama. I think that the established order decided that we're going to stand by Obama. They decided to rehire him. And they really didn't have to rig anything. They had the labor unions, they had the Latinos, they had other minorities. They had everybody that felt, I guess, to some degree, jeopardized by the Republican agenda, that they mobilized, they galvanized, and they put boots on the ground, and they had a great ground, movement, or ground swell, you could say, and they got out the vote, and they did all the things they needed to do, and that's that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say. talked about super PACs, labor delivered, the various minority factions came through. We talked about the fact that the pundits were so wrong, and the the pollsters for the Republicans, I mean, just way off. And if I were Fox News, what I would have done immediately is I would have fired Turd Blossom, and that's the nickname that Bush and Cheney gave Karl Rove, the architect, the Bush's brain. And I would have fired Dick Morris. How could you have someone that would ever? I mean, they were guaranteeing. They said they were beaming with confidence that Mitt Romney would win, but not just win. He was going to embarrass Obama, and it was going to be a landslide. Well, they should be ashamed of themselves. And and even Karl Rove saying that Fox News called the race too soon. And that he just knew that there was going to be Brabus they could pull out of the hat in Ohio. And it's amazing. I mean, there's so many missteps and miscues, and we could analyze and perhaps it's already been overanalyzed, all the reasons that Romney lost. But the globalist world order, when they rejected Romney, at whatever point they decided to rehire Obama and extend his contract and renew his his political lease on life, and Romney, even his wife Ann, said that this is his last hurrah. She's not going to support, and she's not going to essentially allow Romney. It's almost like McMahon's wife. She blew $100 million to try to become a United States senator that pays, what's the Senate paying out? I think it's still less than $200,000. I mean, it's crazy. So she'll go back to being a wrestling executive. But Romney, he blew a lot of his personal money. Not so much this election as in 2008. He also blew a lot of money on his senatorial campaign to at that time unseat Teddy Kennedy. So so this guy that says he's a winner. Well, he's lost 3 political elections. 3. With all the money and the name recognition and party support, he couldn't get the job done. And so he's got to feel embarrassed. Well, I shouldn't say that he should feel ashamed, because I mean, look at how many, like, for instance, in professional football, you have the Buffalo Bills. Oh, was it 4 or 5 Super Bowls they went to? Didn't win a single one. So those things happen. Denver had that for many years until John Elway put them over the top. Dan Marino, he didn't win a Super Bowl. Again, I could be wrong on these facts, or at least I think they're facts and evidence as it relates to professional football. But that's all I'm going to say there. Well, I'm just really excited to be able to continue broadcasting and to be able to stay connected with you guys. And I do have to say that you may notice on some of the tapings, I've had some interference from the home front. I have an interruption. I thought that I'd have free and clear my little studio, if you will. And so I've had to cut a few of them short because I had to attend to things. And then there's times where I'm not quite sure how I want to end the program. And sometimes I didn't like the way I finished the program, so I might just cut the final 30 seconds or 20 seconds off. So if you see where it's not 20 minutes or 30 minutes, or and then there's times where I don't set a timer, but generally I do have a timer on, and this one I'm just about out of time. So thank you for listening, supporting, telling others. All the information that pertains to this program you'll easily and so readily find at TomDonahueReports.com. That's the blog, that's YouTube channel, that's the archives, and various other things that we offer. I'm Tom Donahue for Tom Donahue Reports, putting America first, New World Order dead last, and the world's not going to end 2012, and America is still going